task sequence is available, deploy Windows 11 and Office 365, and it's starting to run that process. So let's leave that running. This is going to take a while. Okay, so now that installation is complete, we can see we have a copy of Windows 11 nicely deployed, and we have copies of Office nicely pushed out to this machine. Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to check out MDT with Windows 11 and Office 365, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a capture and we're going to do a deploy of that operating system with Office 365 integrated. So let's come over to the whiteboard and have a quick look at what the plan is that we're going to do. So we're going to have MDT, or Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, actually installed on one of our servers. This Microsoft Deployment Toolkit to work is actually going to need a file share setup, or an MDT share. This is part of the build process. Inside MDT, what we're going to also install is a couple of other bits and bobs. We're going to bring in some Office 365, which is going to be one of our applications. And we're also going to bring in a Windows 11 operating system image. Using that information, what we can go off and do is we can build something called a task sequence. Okay, so what a task sequence is it's basically a script, and this script is going to detail out how to install the operating system itself, i.e. Windows 11, any other applications with the operating system, and any sort of configuration that we want to make to that environment as it goes out to install. So what this is going to do is this is going to be our reference task sequence. So we're going to go through the process of installing our operating system, our application, our configuration, and at the end of it, we're going to do something called a capture. So what this will do is it will generalize the operating system, i.e. take away all the uniqueness of the operating system, like the name and the IP address and any other unique information about it. And then it will actually capture that to an image, a WIM file that will pull back to the share, and we can use that to deploy. So what this means is we're going to have a couple of machines that we're going to work with. I've got virtual machines, but you would do this with physical computers if you're imaging physical computers. I'm going to have a reference machine, and this reference machine is going to have this task sequence actually go to it, and it's going to install Windows 11 and it's going to install Office onto this reference machine. Then what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a capture process on this, and then this is going to capture this reference machine back to this file share, and there's going to be an image of that reference machine here. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to do another task sequence, and this is going to be our deployment task sequence, and this is going to take our image file that we have created and deploy this to the selection of machines that we want. So for example, I'm just going to have a virtual machine called deploy out here just as a demonstration, but you would have multiple different machines that you could actually send this image to. This image will then end up with Windows 11 and Office actually pre-installed on it without us having to go through that process afterwards. So let's go and have a look at this inside the environment and what needs to actually be done to set all this stuff up, and we'll go through that kind of process. Okay, let's get straight into the demo. So I have over here Hyper-V, and I have three machines. I've got my Windows Server machine here, I've got my reference machine, and my deployment machine, the one that I'm going to send the image to afterwards, remember. So on my Windows Server machine, I have a few things pre-installed. So I actually have MDT installed. As you can see here, this is the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit workbench. I have done another video on this before that kind of showed this in a little bit more detail, so you can go check that one out. So remember this deployment workbench, once you've actually installed MDT, you get to build something called a deployment share. This here is a representation of this file share over here called MDT Build Lab that's sitting on the root of my C. This actually needs to be shared up as well, because this is the location that we are actually going to send images back to. So this does actually need to, if you right click on it, go into properties, you need to make sure that this is actually shared, and this one is currently shared as // DC /MDT build lab $, just to hide it. You don't have to hide it, but it's something you might want to do inside your environments. So what I also have here is I have a number of things on this machine. So if I go to my downloads, I've also got a bunch of Windows ADK setups down here. Now we also need this installed. This is the Windows Automated Deployment Toolkit. This is free to go and download. If we just pop over into the Googles and type Windows ADK, what you should find is the very first link there, download and install the Windows ADK. This is required for MDT to actually function correctly, because what is contained in here is a bunch of tools related to deployments. One of the main things that contained in here, though, is Windows PE, or the pre-install environment. This is the initial environment that will be sent out to the computer, and it is like a very tiny copy of Windows that's loaded into RAM that then allows us to do the imaging processes. So MDT won't actually work until you install that thing. Now, the other things that I've actually got down here, I've got Windows 11 Business Edition. This is just the ISO format. This is actually just the trial version. Again, if you just come over to Google and you search for Windows 11 eval, you'll find the evaluation center here for Windows 11 Enterprise. Just come up here and download that ISO. Very quick and straightforward. You don't need any extra money or registration to do that. So once you've downloaded that ISO, what you can do is you can double click on the ISO and it will be here loaded in, ready for us to use. We need to actually import this into our MDT environment to get started. So if I go into operating systems, I've already pre-imported this, but let's just see what that process looks like. You just right click, click import and click full set of files down here. And then you just point that to the directory where your ISO has been actually loaded. So we can just OK that one, click next on that one. And this should take, it'll hang for a few seconds here as it goes and scans that disk, but it should show us the copies of Windows 11 that are available within that ISO that is currently loaded. Okay, so as you can see, the destination directory name is Windows 11 Enterprise Evaluation. We can change this to number 2 because I've already got one called that. And you can just click next, and that's going to actually import that process. I'm going to stop this execution now because I've already pre-imported this beforehand. That will take probably about 10 or 15 minutes. Once you're done with that, you're going to have this Windows 11 Enterprise Evaluation image here. This is a WIM image, or a Windows imaging file image. This is what we're going to use to deploy our initial copy of Windows 11. Now, what else we need to actually do with this? We need applications. If I go into C, MDT Build Lab and Applications, what I have here is Office 365 Pro Plus x64 edition. Now, this is actually something called the Office Click to Run tool. It's actually very small. What happens here is this executable file, once you run it, starts to look for an XML file. I'm going to get it to look for this XML file here, 365 config. This tells it where to go and download and install Office from. So if I just open this with Notepad for a moment, you'll see it's an XML file, and it tells it to go and download Office Pro Plus Retail. It also tells it to do a display level of none, except Euler equals true, and updates is enabled. That means this will actually do a silent install of Office 365 in the background for us to actually work with, which is great. You can get this again just from Googling around. It's a very quick and easy download, and search for something called the Office Click to Run. And if you go for Office Click to Run, we should have somewhere down here, Click to Run download. Search for that one. There we go. Download the Office deployment tool from the official location. Just go and grab this. And what you need to do is it will come with a default XML file, which is that one. You need to just modify that XML file slightly, because this default XML file, if we go and look at this notepad over here, it doesn't have those additional steps down there to actually disable the installation window and actually automatically accept the Euler. So you must remember to actually go and put those extra things in so that your XML file kind of looks a bit like my XML file here. Right, once we've got those two components actually loaded in, we can go and start to create a task sequence. Now, I already have a default task sequence created here, as I was testing this earlier, but let's just go through that process again. So if I create a new task sequence, I'll call this task sequence ID 002. I'll call it 002 demo, okay? And what I'm going to do is there's a few different task sequence templates here. We're just going to leave this as a standard client task sequence because we're doing this for the first time. The operating system that we're going to install is this Windows 11 Enterprise Evaluation. That's great. We're not going to specify a product key at the time. If I did have a multiple activation key or a volume license key, I could pop it in here if I wanted to. I'm just going to call this Mike Demo. And the organization name, I'm going to call it Mike Net. Okay. We're going to set an admin password, and this will be the local admin password of this machine. And that's it. It's going to build us a task sequence out now that we can actually go and edit. Now, just because that's completed doesn't mean that there isn't things we have to edit. We have to right click on this now, go into properties. So there's a couple of things we want to do inside here. There's lots and lots and lots of options that's happening, but essentially what's going on is this is actually going to deploy at this point our Windows operating system. Once it's deployed our Windows operating system, we're going to actually have this sysprep process go through, which is going to generalize our computer, and it's then actually going to capture the Windows PE image and bring it back to our environment. So a couple of things I need to do to actually make this work properly. First of all, I'm just going to disable BitLocker for the moment. You may want to turn on BitLocker yourself, that's fine, but this will make my imaging process a lot quicker for the moment. I'm also going to need to come inside here. You see where it says apply local GPO package and imaging? You need to go and add another restart computer at that point. It's just a little bug with Windows 11 when you do this deploy. If you don't restart at this point, you'll find that this deployment and capture will actually fail. Okay, so one of the other things we actually want to do down here is actually install Office 365. So remember with Office 365, we have our setup process here. What we need to do is we need to pop over to our applications, right click a new application, and then import an application with source files. We can fill in our information here. We can put in Microsoft, we can put in MS Office, we can put in our version numbers, and then we can start to pop in our sources. Now our source is actually going to be, in this case, this PC, local disk C, MDT build lab, applications, and the Office for install Office 365 because I've copied that click to runs tool into that location. We're going to actually need to insert a command line here too. So to do that, we want setup.exe /config and then point it to that location. So it will be for me Office 365. What was it? Office 365 config? Just 365 config. 365 config.xml. All right. That will then import that application. I've already done this previously, so I've already got a copy here called Install Office 365 Pro Plus. If I go to the properties of that now, you will be able to see, if I click on the details, there is the quiet installation command setup.exe /configure 365 config XML. Wonderful. So now if I pop back over to my task sequence and I pop back over to my 002 demo, if we come to this section that says install applications, we can do installing a single application down here, properties on that one, and we can select our Office 365 from here. That's all cool. So just remember, we also still need that restart computer down here, and I'm also going to make sure that BitLocker is disabled. That's good. We'll just apply that. That should be good for the moment. We'll just take note on this create WIM location where it's actually going to run this. This is going to run a create WIM, ZTI backup. That's all good. Okay, there is one more little bug here within the Windows 11 deployment process, and that's Copilot. Copilot does throw a bit of a wobbly here. So what I mean by a wobbly is the installation of Copilot actually kind of breaks this push process. So we need to remove that as part of this too. So if I go and look in my scripts directory here, so I've got my MDT build lab, right? These scripts are all going to be the deployment scripts. You can add your own extra scripts in here. And what I want you to do is I want you to add in a script in here called remove-Microsoft Copilot. And that script just looks like this. Get Apex package, name Microsoft Copilot, remove Apex package. That's it. Nothing particularly special down there. We just need to go and execute that, that PS1 file as part of this process. Now, what we also need inside our task sequence for that to work is we need this script here. So PowerShell exe, execution policy bypass, and then the actual script root and where the PS1 file is. If I take this script option down here, and I just go back into my 002 demo task sequence, what we want to do is pop down into this custom task section down here. And in this custom task section down here, we want to go and add a command line. And this command line is going to be remove Copilot. I'm just going to pop that command line in there like that. Copilot can be added in afterwards if you want to post installation, but at the moment it's not going to work very well for the capture unless we actually get rid of it at this point. So that's good. That's all nicely set up for us. What we can actually do now is we can start the deployment process. Now, to do this, I'm going to need my reference computer. Now, I need to boot this reference computer into something called Windows PE. Now, to do that, I've got a couple of options. If I come into my MDT Build Lab again, and I go into boot, you'll notice I've got these light touch 64-bit and light touch x86s down here. These are boot images, but not necessarily the images that I actually want. So what I want to do is, before that process initializes, you need to make a little bit of a configuration on the MDT Build Lab. So if we right click on properties on MDT Build Lab up here, and we go into our rules, this is what my rule setup actually looks like at the moment. You might want to pause the video at this point and actually go and have a look at a couple of things. One of the things we really want to turn on down here to make sure is turned on is this event service. See, it says DC 9800. That's the port of this computer. And if I go into my monitoring space, I've got enable monitoring. This is not turned on by default. If I don't turn this on, I won't be able to see within MDT the process of the deployment of the image. So make sure that's actually configured correctly. The other thing that I actually want to do is I want to click on edit bootstrap ini down here. And you've got to make sure that your deployment route is set, your domains are set, and the user account is set down here, which is whatever user account you're going to be using to run this capture image and then pull that image back to that deployment share. I have a custom account created called MDT_BA. You probably want to create yourself your own custom account down here too, just to be a custom account designed just to do this capture process. So notice here on these rule sections, I've got quite a few rules set up down here. I've got things like the SLS share. I've got things like the backup share. You need to make sure that all of these are nicely specified in regards to your machine. It would be nice if Microsoft gave us some drop-down menus, but they don't. This is just essentially a text file config down here. The same with bootstrap.ini. On the Windows PE section, what I've got is I've got an x64 image, and this x64 image, because we're not deploying 32-bit, I've just renamed that to MDT Build Lab. Now, when you've completed that process, what you need to do is right-click and update deployment share. When you do an update deployment share, it might take a few minutes to actually crunch through. So if I update this deployment share, this will regenerate any boot images that I need configured. And what it will also do is make sure that our boot share is completely optimized. So once that's completed, I do actually have this MDT Build Lab disk image. Now what I could do is I could take this ISO file here, and what I could do is I could just go to the settings of my reference computer, and I could load the ISO file in as an extra DVD drive. So I could try and boot from the DVD drive. But I don't want to do that. I've done this in a slightly different way. What I've also got on this MDT server is I've also got Windows Deployment Services. So Windows Deployment Services acts as a Pixie server. Now, if you don't quite know what a Pixie server is, let me just draw this out for you. So here's the idea, right? A Pixie server, in this case, what's acting as our Pixie server is something called our WDS server, our Windows Deployment Services server. Now, this server is going to have in it a boot image, one that I've actually loaded. This boot image will be initializing from boot time and will start a setup process. This is actually a WIM file, a boot.wim, okay? I'm going to have a reference computer over here. Now, normally on a reference computer, you might boot from a hard drive. You might boot from a DVD drive, but you might also have the process of booting from a network location. Now, if you're booting from a network location, what a computer does is it uses this protocol called PXE, or pre-execution environment. So when this computer first comes up and it's set to boot from network, what it does is it makes a broadcast, okay? And a broadcast is essentially a message going out to the entire network to say, hey, is there a Pixie server existing on this network, right? So that broadcast goes out. This WDS server picks up that message, and also running on my WDS server or inside my environment somewhere, I've also got DHCP running, which is also going to pick up that broadcast message. DHCP is going to come in here, provide this reference computer with an IP address to work with, and then the WDS server is going to come in and provide that boot.wim file to boot some form of operating system into memory. That boot.wim file here, that is Windows PE, or Windows pre-execution environment. So to boot that WIM file onto this reference computer, what this is going to do is it's going to give us a little GUI bit of information that is then going to allow our computer to talk back to MDT. And from MDT, it's going to be able to receive the task sequence that we've created before and initialize its installation process. So let's have a look at what that looks like on my environment. So over here, I've got Windows Deployment Services, and I've got this thing called MDT Build Lab. What I've actually done is I've taken this MDT Build Lab here. It's an ISO file, and I need the WIM file. But if I double click on this to load it, if you go inside this WIM file, you go into sources, you'll find this boot.wim here. This is what's actually been imported. So on Windows Deployment Services, we can just go into boot images, right click, add a boot image, and actually point to that specific location. So we can go into that DVD drive and open up boot.wim. That will import it in here. So we can see this boot.wim file has now been imported, and it's MDT Build Lab because that's what I named it as. If we just go and look at the properties, you'll notice there the actual full file name is lighttouchpe64.wim. That's what's contained inside that boot.wim version, and there's the version there as well. Now, the other thing I need to make sure of on this Windows Deployment Services is that it will respond via Pixie. So I've got to right click on properties on here. I've got to go into Pixie response, and I've got to make sure respond to all clients known and unknown is actually available. If you do this just for known client computers, you need to give the MAC address of the network card you're deploying to. So that's all ready and rocking. These are all on the same network. What I can do now is I can open up my client reference computer down here, and we can start this reference build process. Actually, to do this, what I need to do initially is to come into settings and just check the boot order. So if I check this out, I want to make sure that my network adapter is the top thing on the boot order, so it will do a Pixie boot initially. Let's turn that on now. See, it's starting over Pixie IPv4. It's found my WTS boot manager here because it's made that broadcast out to the network. And this should, in a couple of seconds, start to pull that lighttouchpe WIM file. Remember, this is just PE. This is just the boot environment that's going to give me the ability to go and get the task sequence and actually do the deployment process. So again, once that deployment process is complete, we're going to go back into this system. We're going to run another task sequence, and we're going to capture that completed deployment. So if we look at the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit here, going to take a few seconds to load. Okay, now that's loaded, we should be able to see there's our demo that we created, and there's my Windows 11 default capture image that I had from before. So I can select one of these task sequences, click on next on the task sequence. It's going to ask me where I want to capture this information to. Going back to my MDT Build Lab share into captures, click on next on that one, and it's going to begin that process. Now this is going to install the operating system, install the configurations we made, install Office 365. This is going to take a while to actually run. Depending on the speeds of your systems, depending on the speeds of your networks, it's not uncommon to see this run for 45 minutes, an hour or beyond. So at this point, it's a really good time to go and get coffee and go and get lunch. And let's go and have a look at that in a minute to what it looks like when it's completed. So once that deployment process is completed, what we should find is inside our MDT Build Lab, inside captures, we will have our WIM file. Now that process will reboot that computer a number of times. That's normal to see it reboot 3 or 4 times during that installation. Okay, so now that WIM image is actually available, what we need to do is import that WIM image first of all into our deployment systems. So let's go back here into operating systems. Let's go and import an operating system. We're going to import a WIM file this time, not a full OS. We're going to browse for that WIM file, and we're going to go into C, MDT Build Lab, and let's go into captures, and let's go and get our capture image that we've actually got from before. So let's go and set up files are not actually needed on this. That's fine. Destination directory name, let's leave that as is. And let's go and next this to actually import it. Again, this is going to take just a couple of minutes to actually import this WIM file correctly into the MDT system. So let's just wait for that to actually import. Okay, that's nicely imported now. So we can go and create a new task sequence. go into new task sequence, and we're going to call this task sequence deploy. We'll call this deploy Win 11 and Office 365. You could name this whatever you actually want to name this. We'll leave this as a standard client task sequence down here, and we're going to choose our reference image. This is the one that was already deployed once and had all the Windows updates pushed to it and all the Office 365 stuff pushed to it. This OS settings, it's going to be Win 11 and Office 365. The organization is MikeNet. So we can name that whatever we fancy. And we're going to pop in our admin passwords here too. That's great. And we should have our task sequence built. Now let's go and see if there's anything we need to modify within that task sequence itself. So if we go and pop back into this task sequence, Windows 11 and Office 365, pop into the properties of this, pop into the task sequence itself. On the imaging process down here, this whole copy sysprep files, execute sysprep, restart computer, create win file. We don't need any of this stuff down here because we're not actually going to be imaging it at all. So we can just remove that. We'll look through this process. We might actually want to enable Windows updates. I'm not going to do it at the moment, but for the future, you might want to enable Windows updates. You might also want to make sure that BitLocker gets enabled as well, and that the recovery keys get stored in Active Directory. I'm not going to do BitLocker at the moment, just disabling that for the time being. I don't need to restore system user states. I don't need to restore groups. That's fine. I don't need to apply local GPO packages. That's fine. All we basically need to do is make sure the installation of the operating system is working. And if we just pop into that, so there we go. I've definitely got the right operating system ready to load. One of the other things I might want to do is just come and check out validation. I'm going to take off these at the moment because I'm deploying this to a virtual machine with dynamic amounts of RAM and dynamic amounts of CPU, so it might throw a bit of a wobbly there. So I'm just going to take those out. That should be good. So we can OK this now. That's all nicely saved. And now we can go and do that process again for deploying the operating system to our reference machine. So I'm going to come over here, sorry, our reference machine, our deployment machine. Let's go into Windows Client Deploy. Let's go into Settings over here, and let's go and make sure everything is available. So let's change this from 2 to 4 virtual processors so it runs a little bit quicker. It's connected to the Hyper-V switch. That's fine. That's exactly where I want it to be. And it's going to boot from a network adapter. That's cool. So now if I start this, this should actually boot and run our WDS deployment again. It's going to connect to Pixie. It's going to pull down that Windows PE environment, and it should have the ability to select that task sequence. So let's just wait for that to load now. It shouldn't take too long to pull up. Okay, so our task sequence is available. Deploy Windows 11 and Office 365. Let's go next on this. And it's starting to run that process. So let's leave that running. This is going to take a while to actually deploy that operating system. So yeah, let's just watch that go through. Okay, so now that installation is complete, we can see we have a copy of Windows 11 nicely deployed, and we have copies of Office nicely pushed out to this machine. You can continue to use this image and this process now to deploy and image as many machines as you actually want to. So that's a full Office 365 and Windows 11 capture and deploy process using MDT and Windows deployment services. I hope you'll join me next time, and we'll see more tutorials on Azure and Windows infrastructure. And you know the routine, hashtag like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me next time. Goodbye.